Tonight, the head of the ACLU, the head of the national ACLU, has just published this op-ed in the New York Times tonight. It's going to be in tomorrow morning's paper. It calls for President. Do we have a picture of the op-ed there? I can hold it up for you if we don't have a picture of it. This op-ed, there we go. The op-ed calls for President Obama to issue a pardon to former President George W. Bush and former Vice President Dick Cheney and other senior Bush administration officials for overseeing torture as a U.S. policy for years. Quote, "The spectacle of the president's granting pardons to torturers still makes my stomach turn," he said, "but doing so may be the only way to ensure that the American government never tortures again. Pardons would make clear that crimes were committed." Again, this is the head of the national ACLU calling tonight for President George W. Bush to be pardoned by President Obama over the issue of torture. That's provocative. We've got more on that story ahead. Stay with us. So, hey, the war in Afghanistan ended today. What you're looking at here is a ceremony that was held today at an airfield in Kabul. U.S. and NATO troops lowered and folded the coalition flags in a small choreographed ceremony, and that marked the formal end of the U.S. and NATO combat mission in Afghanistan. After more than 13 years, America's longest ever war is now over. By which I mean it's going to continue for a bunch more years. This is one of those days where something that would otherwise be a huge freaking deal, right? The formal end of a giant war was essentially greeted with, because the headline didn't at all match the fine print. Even though the U.S. combat mission in Afghanistan technically ended today, and this ceremony was proof of that, the current U.S. plan is for more than 10,000 American troops to stay in Afghanistan for the foreseeable future, for another decade or even longer, according to the security agreement we have signed. There were going to be 9,800 U.S. troops left there indefinitely. Now they say it will be more than 10,000. The troops were going to have no further combat missions on the ground, but now they say they may still engage in combat missions, and there's no date for them to come home. So, yes, basically they are changing the name from Operation Enduring Freedom to the new one, Operation Resolute Support. But there's a reason why, even though the U.S. marked the formal end of one long part of that long war today, it didn't even warrant a passing mention on the White House website today. Today was a day in the news where the presidency of Barack Obama was very clearly the one that had to take the baton from the previous presidency of George W. Bush. America's longest war in Afghanistan started in year one of the George W. Bush administration. Yes, today it got a new name, but it is still going strong. There was also this headline today about the slow progress of finding countries to accept prisoners who were taken by the last administration with no real plan for what to do with them. They were never charged. They were just stuffed into warehousing in Cuba. 6 prisoners just got sent to Uruguay. They had all been at Guantanamo since 2002. None of them had ever been charged. They were recommended for release by the U.S. government way back in 2009. It has taken another 5 years since then to jump through all the bureaucratic hoops necessary to actually move them out. It's gone under the radar, but the Obama administration in the last few weeks has quietly picked up the pace in terms of transferring guys out of Guantanamo. At the beginning of last month, 1 prisoner was transferred to Kuwait. A few weeks later, 4 Yemenis and a Tunisian were transferred to Georgia and Slovakia. A few days after that, another prisoner was transferred to Saudi Arabia. And now today, we have these 6 prisoners who have been sent to Uruguay. And this, of course, is a scandal to the extent that people are paying attention, even though the Bush administration transferred hundreds of prisoners out of Guantanamo. But this is also something that President Obama has been working on since literally the first day of his presidency, when he signed that executive order that called for the closure of Guantanamo. Guantanamo is still open, of course. It is very slowly emptying out, handful by handful, but it is dragging on forever. And if you need one more piece of today's news, continuing to be the cleanup of the more poorly thought out aspects of the George W. Bush administration, there's also this.
Good evening. U.S. embassies and facilities around the world are preparing for possible violence within the next 24 hours because of the intentional release of a report detailing the torture of terrorism suspects by the CIA under the banner of the War on Terror and in the wake of 9/11. This is not a leak. This is a prepared document, 600 pages in length, released by the Democrats who still control the Senate Intelligence Committee, who believe that once this evidence is out for the the world to see the U.S. will never again use torture as a means of interrogation.
Tomorrow, after months of wrangling between the Senate and the CIA, the U.S. Senate is going to officially release big portions of their exhaustive investigation into torture carried out by the CIA during the George W. Bush administration. Torture authorized as policy in Washington, executed in the field by CIA officers and contractors. The Senate Intelligence Committee spent years investigating this issue, and they've put together a 6,000-page report that we are told will lay out in disturbing detail what sort of torture techniques were used on American-held prisoners. It will also reportedly conclude that these methods were not effective at gaining usable intelligence. It will also reportedly conclude that some intelligence officials lied to or misled the White House and Congress for years about what the agency did. Now, there's been some question as to whether the Obama administration would let this report be released. President Obama himself, though, earlier this year, sort of cut to the chase there, endorsed releasing the report and explained why he thinks the report needs to come out.
In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, we did some things that were wrong. We did a whole lot of things that were right, but we tortured some folks. We did some things that were contrary to our values. When we engaged in some of these enhanced interrogation techniques that I believe, and I think any fair-minded person would believe, were torture, we crossed a line. And that needs to be needs to be understood and accepted. And we have to, as a country, take responsibility for that, so that hopefully we don't do it again in the future.
We tortured some folks. Again, we're told to expect a 600-page summary of this multi-thousand-page report to be released tomorrow afternoon. This is a big deal. The U.S. military has put thousands of U.S. Marines on alert throughout the Middle East to prepare for possible repercussions. Joining us now is Jonathan Landay, national security correspondent for McClatchy Newspapers. Mr. Landay, thanks very much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure to be here.
So the release of this report has been debated for not months, years. Lots of arguments around redactions, about whether or not the report should exist and what should be made public. What new information are we likely to learn tomorrow when this 600-page summary is released?
Well, we know what the main conclusions are. You yourself has cited them. But I think what is going to come out in this executive summary that we're going to hopefully see tomorrow are some of the more gritty, disturbing details of the procedures that were used on scores of detainees at secret black sites overseas.
Will there be names of individuals who did these things, names of policymakers who signed off on them?
No. In fact, some of the fight over the redactions were about redacting pseudonyms of pseudonyms. In other words, there were fake names used to cover up fake names of people. But according to the administration and the intelligence community, if you took one of these fake names and you used the information surrounding it throughout the report, you could, or somebody could, detect the real identity of CIA covert officers who were involved in the program. And of course, the other part of the battle over the redactions was the administration and the intelligence community's contentions that there was information in this report that would anger and jeopardize foreign governments who were who cooperated in the program.
In terms of the expected fallout here, I have to say, I don't know if this is an answerable question, but I'll put it to you anyway. It seems to me like it is not a secret, at least it's not a secret to the President of the United States speaking publicly, that some of what the United States did after 9/11 was torture. That's a known fact. It's been described. We've actually had a lot of pretty hairy details disclosed by various means over the years. That isn't a secret. If there isn't any identifying information about who done it, let alone some sort of legal strategy to bring people to justice for having done this illegal thing, arguably illegal thing, why is there an expectation, or why is the fear being raised that this report is going to land like such a shot heard around the world?
Well, we're going to have to wait and see. As you know, it's speculation. Obviously, there are some people who believe that the concerns that are being voiced about possible violent repercussions are overreacting. And of course, you have former President Bush, former Vice President Cheney, current and former CIA officials, and others who are contending that the committee got it wrong. That the most important key conclusions of the report, that the use of these procedures did not produce significant intelligence, did not win the cooperation of those who were subjected to these procedures, that the CIA misled various parts of the government, including the White House and Congress, is all wrong. That, in fact, these procedures produced intelligence that was significant and led to the thwarting of plots against the United States, terrorist plots against the United States, and led the CIA to the arrest of some pretty significant players in al-Qaeda.
Jonathan Landay, national security correspondent from McClatchy newspaper. Thanks very much for helping us understand what to expect for tomorrow, Jonathan. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
The argument over this has been going on for years in terms of people arguing about whether or not this could come out. This is not about trying anybody for torture. This is not about bringing, naming and shaming people. This is not about exposing people who did this so that the world can take their, revenge or something. Everybody involved in this study, everybody involved in this policy, everybody who is exposed in this report will continue to be anonymous, as they are now. But the right is telling us to freak out about this report that comes out tomorrow. We'll see when it comes out. Should be about 600 pages. We'll keep you posted. Stay with us.